I worked as a personal assistant for a woman whose family had owned half the state since the 1800s. One morning, she threw a crystal vase across the room because I bought peasant eggs from a local grocery store, instead of having them flown in from a specific heritage farm in England. She told me that her digestive system was far too refined for anything produced by a chicken that hadn't been raised on organic lavender-infused grain. It was the most insane thing I'd ever heard. During a high society fundraiser, I sat next to an elderly woman who belonged to one of the founding families of the city. When I mentioned I was a paediatric surgeon, she didn't look impressed. Instead, she asked which prep school I attended. When I told her I went to a public high school, she physically recoiled, pulled her silk shawl tighter, and whispered to her friend that the standards for invitation had clearly plummeted if the trades were now allowed to dine with them. I was a waiter at a very exclusive private club. A regular, whose last name is on several buildings downtown, sent back a bottle of $900 wine because he claimed he could taste the lack of pedigree in the grapes. He went on a 10-minute rant about how only families with at least 4 generations of wealth should be allowed to own vineyards, as new money owners supposedly didn't understand the spiritual weight of the soil. He then left a $5 tip on a $2,000 bill. My college roommate came from an extremely wealthy, old-school New England family. When my parents came to visit, they brought us a box of homemade cookies. My roommate refused to touch them, later telling me that she was strictly forbidden by her mother from eating food prepared in a kitchen that hadn't been professionally inspected or staffed by a culinary graduate. She genuinely believed that middle-class germs were a biological threat to her family's constitution and superior genetics. I once did some landscaping work for a family living in a massive historic estate. The matriarch approached me and demanded I move an entire row of mature oak trees because they were blocking the historical symmetry of her morning view. When I explained that moving century-old trees would likely kill them and cost a fortune, she just scoffed and said, "Money is for people who have to worry about the cost. Just do it and try not to look so common while you're standing on my lawn." At an art gallery opening, an old money patriarch spent the evening scoffing at every piece of modern art. He eventually cornered the gallery owner and told him that art ended in the 1920s and that anything created after his family lost their first steamship fortune was vulgar noise. He then pointed at a young artist and said, "I can see the desperation of a paycheck in your brushstrokes. True art requires the leisure of a trust fund to truly breathe, don't you think?" I worked at a luxury car dealership where a young man from a famous banking family came in. He wanted a bespoke interior, but insisted that the leather not come from stressed cows. He told me that his family's estates in Europe only used leather from cattle that listened to classical music. When I told him we couldn't guarantee the musical tastes of the livestock, he sighed and said, "This is why we usually don't deal with the public. You simply lack the vision for true quality." My ex-boyfriend's family was the definition of conceited old money. For Christmas, I gave his mother a hand-knitted cashmere scarf I had spent months making. She looked at it with visible disgust, held it with 2 fingers like it was a dirty rag and said, "How quaint. It will make a lovely bed for the gardener's cat. In this house, we only wear items with a heritage label that is at least 100 years old." I broke up with him that evening in the driveway. I was an intern at a top-tier law firm when a client from a prestigious family arrived. He refused to sit in the waiting room because the chairs were mass-produced and offended his posture. He insisted on standing in the hallway until the senior partner arrived, claiming that his family's spine had been bred for Chippendale furniture, and that sitting in a standard office chair would cause him irreparable social and physical trauma. He wasn't even joking. He was dead serious. I once attended a garden party at a mansion where the hostess complained that the sunset was unusually garish that evening. She turned to a group of us and said, "I suppose the atmosphere is becoming as loud and tacky as the new people moving into the valley. Even the sky has lost its sense of understated elegance." She then spent the rest of the night judging the guests' shoes, claiming she could tell someone's net worth by the click of their heel on the marble floor. A woman from a prominent old money family came into the boutique where I worked. She wanted to return a dress she'd worn once because she saw a local weather girl wearing something similar on TV. She told me that her family's entire social standing was based on uniqueness and that she couldn't possibly be associated with a garment that was accessible to the televised masses. She demanded a full refund and an apology for the emotional distress of being seen in a common dress. I worked as a flight attendant on private jets. One passenger, a silver-haired man from a dynasty family, complained that the ice cubes in his scotch weren't clear enough. He claimed that his family's private estate had a special filtration system that made ice transparent like the family's intentions. He then spent the entire 4-hour flight explaining why people who work for a living will never truly understand the burden of maintaining a legacy, while I was literally serving him. My friend's grandmother is incredibly wealthy and snobbish. When she found out I was studying to be a teacher, she looked at me with genuine pity and asked, "But who will manage your estates?" When I told her I didn't have estates, she went silent for a full minute, then whispered, "How fascinating. I've read about people like you in novels, but I never thought I'd actually have to share a tea service with one." She then signalled for the maid to take my cup away. At a country club event, I overheard a man complaining about the new money members who had recently joined. He said, "They have the yachts, sure, but they don't have the silence. Their wealth is so loud." My family has been rich since the revolution, and we've learned that the only thing more vulgar than being poor is showing everyone exactly how much you have. He then proceeded to list every historical figure his great-great-grandfather had supposedly snubbed at dinner parties. I was a realtor showing a historic mansion to an older couple from an elite lineage. The wife walked into the kitchen and gasped in horror at the stainless steel appliances. She turned to me and said, "This looks like a laboratory for the middle class. My ancestors had kitchens that were hidden away as they should be. The very idea of seeing where the help works is an affront to my sensibilities." She refused to even look at the rest of the house because the kitchen was too visible. I used to work in a high-end jewellery store. A woman came in to have a Victorian-era brooch cleaned. When I offered her a complimentary bottle of water, she looked at the plastic bottle and said, "I don't put my lips on petroleum products." Do you not have crystal flutes for your guests? Or has this establishment completely abandoned its dignity to cater to the suburban crowd? She then waited in the car while her valet stood in the store to watch me clean the jewellery. I was at a charity auction where a very wealthy woman was bidding on a vintage trunk. When she won, she told the crowd, "I don't actually want the trunk, but my great-aunt's maid once stole a similar one, and I feel it's my ancestral duty to reclaim it from the public sphere." She then instructed the movers to take it directly to the landfill because she didn't want anyone of lower status to ever have the chance to own something that looked like her family's property. An old money couple came into the library where I work. They were looking for a specific genealogy book. When I helped them find it, the man looked at my name tag and asked, "Is that a local name?" When I said yes, he sighed and told his wife, "You see, dear, the locals are finally learning to read. Perhaps there's hope for the workforce after all." They didn't even say thank you. They just walked away as if I were a piece of furniture that had suddenly learned how to speak. I worked at a 5-star hotel where an aristocratic family was staying. The teenage daughter threw a tantrum because her emotional support pony wasn't allowed in the penthouse suite. Her father tried to bribe the manager, saying, "My family's name is on the deed of the bank that owns your mortgage. Surely you can overlook a little manure for the sake of a bloodline that outdates this entire city. When the manager refused, the father called him a peasant with a title. I once dated a guy from a Mayflower family. His mother invited me to lunch and spent the entire time testing my knowledge of 17th century silverware. When I used the wrong spoon for my soup, she put her own spoon down, sighed heavily, and said to her son, "She's very pretty, James, but she's clearly rough-hewn. It would take 3 generations of polishing to make her presentable for the annual regatta." I left before the main course was even served, and I didn't look back. A famous old money socialite once came into the flower shop where I worked. She wanted a bouquet that smelled like old books and stable air. When I suggested some earthy scented lilies and greenery, she looked at me with pure condescension and said, "Child, you can't suggest anything to me." My family practically invented the Victorian language of flowers. Just arrange them in a way that doesn't scream department store bargain, if that's even possible for someone of your background. I was a caddy at an ultra-exclusive golf course. One golfer, a descendant of an industrial tycoon, refused to use his driver because he saw a commoner, a guest of a member, using the same model. He snapped the club in half over his knee and told me I refuse to share a brand with someone who probably buys their clothes on credit. Bring me my vintage wooden set. At least those require a level of grace that cannot be purchased by the nouveau riche. I worked for a high-end catering company. At a wedding for 2 elite families, the mother of the bride insisted that all the servers have symmetrical facial features so as not to distract the guests from the beauty of the decor. She actually went down the line and vetted us, pointing at one girl and saying, "Her nose is a bit too working class, don't you think? Put her in the kitchen where she won't be seen." We were all horrified by her blatant arrogance. My neighbour is from an old money family that lost most of its fortune but kept the attitude. She once called the police on me because I was disturbing the historical peace by mowing my lawn at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. She told the officer that her family had a gentleman's agreement with the neighbourhood since the 1940s that chores were to be done by silent staff, and that my loud, gasoline-powered display of manual labour was a direct insult to her heritage. I was at a museum gala when a wealthy donor's wife started criticising the lighting on a famous portrait. She told the curator, "This light makes the subject look like she actually enjoyed her life." My family's portraits are always dim and sombre, as true wealth is a heavy burden, not a source of joy. You've made this gallery look far too welcoming for the general public. The curator just nodded, while she ranted about how smiling in photos was a sign of low breeding. A college professor I had came from a very wealthy, snobbish background. He once failed a student on an essay because the student used the word wealthy instead of prosperous. He told the class, "Only people who don't have money use the word wealthy. It's a word for the aspirational classes." In my circles, we don't discuss money at all. It's simply a fact of nature, like the weather. If you can't write with the proper distance, you don't belong in my seminar. I worked as a valet at a gala. An older man in a vintage Rolls-Royce refused to give me his keys. He said, "Your hands look like they've touched a steering wheel of a Japanese car recently." I can't have that energy transferring to my upholstery. He made me stand there while he waited for the head of security, who he happened to know from boarding school, to come and park the car personally. He treated me like I was a literal ghost standing on the pavement. I was once at a high-end restaurant where an old money family was dining at the next table. The teenage son started complaining that his steak was too symmetrical. He told his mother, "It looks like it was cut by a machine." I want a steak that looks like it was carved by someone who actually knows our family's preferences for irregular, rustic edges. His mother actually called the chef out to the table and lectured him on the art of the uneven cut for nearly 20 minutes. A woman from a legendary real estate family came into my boutique. She refused to use the dressing room because she claimed the mirrors were calibrated for the masses to make them look thinner. She told me, "I don't need tricks to feel beautiful. I have my ancestry for that. I shall simply hold the clothes up and imagine how they would look in my ballroom." Mirrors in public places are always so desperate to please, don't you find? She then left without buying a single thing. I worked as a secretary for a woman whose family had a wing in the local museum. She once made me rewrite a 3-sentence email 40 times because she felt the font looked too much like a ransom note for a middle-class kidnapping. She insisted on a font that had generational weight and didn't try too hard to be legible. She genuinely believed that if an email was easy to read, it meant the sender was too eager to be understood by the common people.